The season premiere of House of Dragon begins with the great council that was assembled in Harrenhal to determine who would succeed the old king, Jaehaerys Targaryen, on the Iron Throne. Over 1,000 lords were in attendance to help determine the line of succession. The king was at a crossroads after a series of unfortunate events led to the death of his sons, Aemon and Baelon. Baelon was named the heir after Aemon was killed by a mere scout on the island of Toth. By choosing Baelon, the old king denied Aemon's daughter Rhaenys her right to the throne. This created a conflict between Jaehaerys and those who supported Rhaenys' claim, which at the time included the Queen Alysanne, Corlys Velaryon, and Bormund Baratheon. However, when Baelon died due to what the Maesters called the burst belly, the line of succession was once again put into question. This time around, the heir was decided by the Great Council we see here, and the two most legitimate claims were that of Rhaenys and Viserys. The episode doesn't go into detail regarding the vote tally, but Fire and Blood leaves room for suspicion. The count was never publicly revealed, but was allegedly in Viserys' favor in a ratio of 20-1. The Great Council is slightly different in Fire and Blood, but I wonder if the show will explore a Maester conspiracy as different conflicts begin to unfold. Altering the vote tally would have been quite the conspiracy, and they would most certainly have acted in accordance with a powerful house or two. After the conclusion to the Great Council, we see a time skip well into Viserys' reign, and are introduced to Rhaenyra in the midst of flying her dragon Syrax above the clouds. There's a feeling of happiness and liberty coming from her introduction, which is a contrast from her more gloomy expression at the end of the episode. The adventurous Rhaenyra would soon be forced to accept the burden of Targaryen prophecy, and the responsibility of inheriting the Iron Throne of Westeros. Upon landing Syrax in the Dragon Pit, we get the first glimpse of Rhaenyra's relationship with Alicent Hightower, who seemed to be her closest friend at court. There's an impression that we don't see in Fire and Blood, which is that they're all but attached to the hip, and the extent of their relationship is expressed throughout the episode, where we see them hanging out together, gossiping with one another, and sharing intimate moments with each other as well. However, the question of how genuine their relationship was is to be determined. Their introduction transitions into a journey through King's Landing until they reach the Red Keep, and more specifically, Queen Emma's chambers. The queen is happy to see her daughter, but quickly takes a stand against Rhaenyra's dragon rides, and reminds her how women in their society serve the realm, by giving birth to royal children. Her comparison between the childbed and the battlefield alludes to her fate in this episode, when she has complications trying to birth Baelon, and is figuratively fighting for their lives. We are then introduced to King Viserys and his small council, who seem to be in good spirits until Corlys presses an issue that is quickly dismissed by the rest of the council. Viserys was a generous king, and popular for hosting many tourneys and feasts throughout his reign, but he also had the reputation of having a weak resolve, as stated by Daemon later in the episode, and demonstrated in this scene when Otto Hightower presumably speaks for the king in response to Corlys when they're all in the same room. Otto's first line of dialogue establishes the power dynamic of the small council. While the Hand of the King is technically the second most powerful man in the realm, dismissing Corlys' warning without an answer from the king himself tells us a lot about the way things are done in this council. The triarchy that Corlys was referring to in this scene is an alliance between the free cities of Emir, Tyrosh, and Lys, who are in position to control the southern shipping lanes of the Narrow Sea. Corlys is the Lord of Driftmark and the Master of Ships. He's famous for his 9 voyages throughout the world that made him the richest man in Westeros at one point in time. The Velaryons maintain their wealth from the passing trade in the Narrow Sea, which is partly the reason why Corlys is more concerned than the rest of the council and unsatisfied with Otto's response. The topic of discussion is directed to the tourney being planned in the name of the king's potential heir. Producing an heir has been the king's priority for quite some time, and this is a plot point that's explored throughout the episode. The following scene gives us our first look at Daemon Targaryen and his relationship with Rhaenyra. Daemon is sitting on the Iron Throne, to the dismay of Harold Westerling and the amusement of Rhaenyra. We immediately get a taste of his arrogance and his sense of ambition. In this scene and throughout the episode, we see the bond that's shared between Daemon and Rhaenyra. They're portrayed to be closer to each other than they are with other members of their family. And symbolically, I think part of that is the acceptance to their inner dragon. We saw Queen Aemma scoff at Rhaenyra for stinking of dragon, and we know that she doesn't like it when Rhaenyra goes flying on Syrax. Viserys, despite being a Targaryen king, claims that men should have never messed with dragons in the first place later in the episode. They're both suppressing the idea of dragons in their own way, while Daemon and Rhaenyra embrace it all. They both share a bond with their dragons. They choose to communicate in Valyrian with each other, and after this scene, they both carry Valyrian steel with them wherever they go. This acceptance of their Targaryen nature brings them together in a way. Daemon responds to the mention of a new heir with arrogance, but deep down he's hiding his insecurity of potentially being replaced by one, as we see in his brothel scene with Mysaria. Healthcare, or lack thereof, is a theme in this episode, and the practitioners of healthcare in this medieval society are the maesters. Maesters are educated and sworn into their order at the Citadel, which is located in Old Town. The High Towers are the lords of Old Town, and they were an important part of the founding of their order. My takeaway from this scene is that Viserys is oblivious towards his own healthcare, and that Grand Maester Mellos is a little too close to Otto for comfort. We soon learn that the Queen has an unfortunate pregnancy history, and despite her lectures to Rhaenyra about accepting the gender roles in their society, she doesn't have that same energy with Viserys. She's clearly been worn down by her birth complications and exhausted by the expectations of birthing a male heir for the king. This scene is pretty ominous overall, and it gives us a taste of what to expect later on. The next sequence of events gives us more insight into what type of man Daemon is. He's portrayed to be a natural leader of men, ruthless when necessary, and willing to do whatever it takes to achieve his goal. Daemon is highly respected by the men of the Watch, and he sends a clear message to the rest of the city about how crime will be answered moving forward. Denying Daemon of his potential to be great or hold any type of power is one of Otto Hightower's biggest obstacles at this point in time, which is why he actively tried to conspire against Daemon in an effort to remove him from access to power and influence. In the very next scene, we see Otto attempt to do so once again, hiding behind a false sense of morality in order to push his agenda. And it's likely that the often absent Daemon was present for the next meeting of the small council in order to defend himself from what Otto was planning on whispering in Viserys' ear. This tension boils over into the tourney for the heir, where we see just how spiteful Daemon could be, choosing to publicly embarrass Otto by defeating his son in a joust in dramatic fashion and then following up his win by asking for his daughter's favor. While Daemon was being petty, Otto was possibly in the middle of his plot to murder the Queen Aemma and her newborn baby. The evidence is subtle at best, but it's highly suspicious of the messenger informing Otto that the Queen was having birth complications before the king himself. You would think that news of an emergency of this caliber would go straight to Viserys, but it didn't. Viserys' worst fear was being realized, and Mellos' solution was to perform an emergency C-section that would most certainly kill the Queen. According to him, it was likely that Aemma and Baelon would both die unless they acted to save the unborn child. But at this point, can we really trust his judgment? Viserys himself questioned the expertise of Mellos earlier in the episode. His decision to sacrifice Aemma for Baelon is controversial, especially since he didn't give his queen a choice in the matter. But because of Mellos, Aemma was already lost in his eyes, and Baelon still had a chance to live. While I don't think Otto and Mellos went out of their way to murder the Queen and Baelon, I do think there's enough evidence to entertain the idea that they conspired to have her killed if they had the chance. It's possible that they took the Queen's history of birth complications into consideration when planning their next move, as well as the King's obsession with wanting a new heir. Rhaenys and Corlys gave an interesting commentary on the tourney, being held to celebrate life in times of peace, yet the men are here to spread blood and violence for glory. The finalists came down to two men who were quite unlike one another, the common-born knight Criston Cole and the crowned prince Daemon Targaryen. Sir Criston was able to best Daemon in the end, while Daemon was caught up in his moment of glory. The final joust added to the characterization of Daemon, who isn't the type to accept defeat so easily, and the legend of Criston Cole, who certainly caught the eye of many lords and ladies that day, including the Lady Alicent and the Princess Rhaenyra, who were both attracted to him. Tragedy followed House Targaryen with the deaths of Aemma and Baelon, And for the first time, we get to see what's most likely a traditional funeral for dragon lords, who are put to rest with the fire from their dragons. Rhaenyra is the focus of this scene, and we see her share moments of vulnerability with Daemon and expressions of contempt for Viserys, who looks visibly broken. She shares a line with Daemon about the fact that she will never be the son Viserys has always wanted. It's clear that this is something that has always bothered her about the relationship between her and her father. Unfortunately for Rhaenyra, this simple fact will continue to haunt her for the rest of her days, even after her father acknowledges her as the heir to the throne. The game is often merciless, and Otto Hightower wasted no time in making his next move. In what might have been later on in the very same day as Aemma and Baelon's funeral, Otto presses the issue about the line of succession in front of the small council, with Daemon present in secret. He ironically kicks off the meeting by saying that this is the last thing anyone wishes to discuss, when in reality, it's the only thing he wanted to discuss. You would think that Otto, or anyone for that matter, would have the decency to wait a few days or even a couple of weeks before pressing the matter. But instead, Otto leads the effort to strip Daemon of his right to inherit the throne, with the support of none other than Grand Maester Mellos. Within the middle of the discussion, Otto states that the gods have yet to make a man that lacks the patience for absolute power, when referring to Daemon. Yet, he himself is not exempt from his own statement, and I would go as far as saying that he is describing himself. Otto openly admits that Daemon has been able to win the loyalty of the City Watch, and we find out through Viserys that Otto has pushed him out of several offices already. At this point in the episode, it's obvious that Otto has a personal agenda against Daemon. He knows that having him around would make things more difficult for him in his attempt to gain more power and influence, and it's supported by Otto's consistent drive to separate the two. He proposes the idea that Rhaenyra should be named the heir, while Corlys proposes that his wife should be considered once again, before Viserys storms out of the room. Despite coming up short in his effort, Otto's plan to have his daughter marry the king was about to begin. We see Otto send the Raven to Old Town, by way of Mellos, before Alicent appears in his chambers. Using his underage daughter to drive his political scheme is pathetic to say the least, but clever on his part. He wanted Alicent to start building a relationship with Viserys while the king was at his most vulnerable, in order to capitalize on the opportunity to arrange a marriage when the time comes. The following scene is interesting to say the least. Daemon spends the night at a brothel on the Street of Silk following the death of the queen and his nephew. Not the most justifiable of decisions, but Daemon was right in saying that everyone mourns in their own way. Otto reports that Daemon was celebrating the death of Baelon and made a toast to the heir for a day. While I don't deny that Daemon said this, it's interesting that we don't actually see him say it in real time. I think this statement was taken out of context and strategically used by Otto to create a rift between the king and Daemon. Daemon didn't have a celebratory expression that night, and he was sort of pressured into making a toast by Mysaria. It's likely that Viserys might have sent him back to the Vale in any case, considering that the statement was disrespectful in any context, but I wonder if the context would have mattered. Viserys is understandably furious about this. We then see the two brothers have an emotional exchange of words. Daemon doesn't deny the heir for a day statement, but he decides to leave everything out in the open, claiming that his brother has kept him at a distance instead of by his side. I think Daemon is a prideful man who would fully commit himself to the right cause, such as being the hand of the king. Being a lord husband to a lady from the Vale and being the lord commander of the City Watch are things that are beneath him, in his eyes. Viserys, on the other hand, feels slighted by the fact that Daemon makes a mockery of court, despite Viserys constantly defending his actions. The king claims that Otto Hightower is a loyal and unwavering hand, who's more honorable than Daemon would ever be. Yet Otto Hightower possibly conspired to have his wife and son killed, and is currently in the middle of a scheme to separate the king from his brother and arrange his underage daughter into the royal family. Daemon countered by calling his brother weak, claiming that he could protect him from those who take advantage of him. Viserys has no response for this. Instead, he officially sends Daemon off to the Vale before cutting himself on the Iron Throne, which is symbolically an immediate sign that he made a bad decision. The episode closes with a conversation between Viserys and Rhaenyra, while juxtaposing different lords swearing oaths of fealty to the princess. He begins his conversation with a probing question, before giving Rhaenyra a lesson on history, politics, and prophecy. Viserys states that dragons played a part in the doom of old Valyria, and are a power that man should never have trifled with, before suggesting that history will repeat itself if they don't tread with caution. This is coming off his conversation with Daemon, where he essentially antagonized him. I wonder if Viserys thought about this concept before sending him away. He follows up by breaking the news that Rhaenyra will be the new heir, before closing the conversation with Aegon's prophecy about the Long Night. Viserys' obsession to strengthen his line and produce an heir takes a different perspective in this context. The burden of a prophecy to help save humanity is enough to drive a man insane, and Rhaenyra is now burdened with the same prophecy. Overall, I think this was a great opening episode, which established the main players in the game and set the foundation for the rest of the dance. Some things that really stood out to me in this episode include Rhaenyra's relationship with Alicent, Rhaenyra's relationship with Daemon, and Daemon's on-screen presence. We leave this episode with Westeros in need of a new queen, a controversial change in the line of succession, and the looming threat of the Triarchy on the Narrow Sea. Thank you for watching. Please like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more content like this. Until next time, peace.